Þá komið að síðasta fyrirlesaranum okkar í dag, áður en við hefjum pallborðsumræður náttúruvernd. Við bjóðum innilega velkominn Dr. Steve J. Carver, landfræðing og dósent við Háskólanum í Leeds, sem ræðir kortlagningu síðustu víðerna Evrópu.
My name is Steve Carver. I'm going to talk to you today about mapping Europe's last wilderness. And if we look at what wilderness means, in the IUCN Category 1B wilderness areas definition, it usually means large, unmodified or slightly modified areas retaining natural character and influence without permanent or significant human habitation, and are protected as such, a natural condition. In 2013, I was involved with a team developing European guidelines on wilderness in Natura 2000. We see a similar definition. Wilderness is an area governed by natural processes, composed of native habitats and species, large enough for the effective ecological functioning of natural processes, but also unmodified or slightly modified without intrusive or extractive human activity, settlements, infrastructure or visual disturbance. So again, stressing the ecological integrity and the human impact on these areas. As part of that work, we developed a European Wilderness Register, which included a Wilderness Quality Index, which was made up of land cover data, potential natural vegetation and grazing intensity, together with remoteness measures and from settlement and from mechanised access. And we did this using a continuous data mapping process, whereby we were able to map wilderness quality, as you can see in the top map there, from least wild to most wild. So artificial surfaces, so built-up areas in red, and then the paler colours running through to the darker colours, increasing in wilderness. We then took that map and modelled the wildest areas across Europe, such that we were able to extract the top 1%, 5% and 10% wildest areas. It's interesting from an Icelandic point of view that in this register, then 43% of Europe's top 1% wildest areas are found in Iceland. And that is a significant figure and brings some responsibility. And it's important that these remaining wilderness areas are adequately protected. But they are under certain threats in particular areas from renewable energy, and there I include geothermal, hydro and wind, but also certain areas we'll see in a minute in an example that I have of mapping at a local scale from 4x4 tourism. In the World Commission on Protected Areas database, we can see that roughly 20% of Iceland is already protected, the terrestrial area, marine area less so. And it's interesting, if we look at these areas overlaid on those maps I've just shown you, that and you can see the areas in pale yellow here, that not all of Iceland's wilderness areas are protected under some kind of formal designation. And this brings into play this issue of de facto versus de jure. So de facto are those areas which have all of the characteristics of wilderness, but are not necessarily protected under law, like the de jure wilderness areas. And so large areas of Iceland do remain unprotected. Some of these are the ice caps in the Central Highlands, but other significant areas like the Drangar Peninsula and parts of the Drangar Peninsula and Trollskagi. The legal framework is important. Sorry, this is a busy slide. There's a lot of text on here, as you would naturally expect. But in the preparatory work for the Nature Conservation Act 2013, you refer to the IUCN Category 1B definition. In Article 3, wilderness conservation is one of the main objectives, conservation in the Act. Under Article 5.19, there's the legal definition. And this is interesting because it says in here, and I will read, an area of uninhabited land, at least in principle, 25 square kilometres in size, in such a way that solitude and nature can be enjoyed without interruption by structures or motorised traffic, and in principle, at least 5 kilometres away from structures and other technical traces, such as power lines, etc. So the in principle is important here in that these are notional targets. In Article 73A, there's an amendment from just earlier this year where the mapping of wilderness is recommended, and the regulation, among other things, stipulates that criteria and assumptions on which the mapping is based will be stated. And as part of that, it says that mapping should be based on internationally recognised criteria. And therefore, that brings us neatly back to IUCN Category 1B. There was a temporary provision added in the amendment, which establishes a legal obligation for all wilderness areas across Iceland to be mapped by June the 1st, 2023. So it's just a little over 2 years away. And in Article 46, the formal designation of wilderness areas for protection should be adopted by the Minister. And further to that, you have your National Planning Strategy adopted in 2016, which also proposes criteria for mapping wilderness across Iceland. There's been some existing mapping projects. It's really good to see. So Raniveg Olefsdottir, Thorri Arnason, his colleague Dave Ostman, and the Icelandic Institute of Natural History have all interpreted these guidelines, these definitions, with other research to produce the maps that you see on the screen there. And it's interesting that the patterns are similar, as you would expect, but they're subtly different in their interpretations. We've done some work, some local work, mapping wilderness areas in the Dranga Peninsula, in the Vestfjords, in response to a proposal for a hydro plant. And here we imported internationally recognised methods. Some of the work we've done in Scotland, for example, being relevant here. And we were able to produce some before and after mapping to show the potential impacts of such a development. And the maps at the top show the wilderness quality degradation as a result of the proposal and the impact on the wilderness classes. We're currently working with another NGO, Skauti, on the Vatnajökull National Park, an area around Vonaskat, mapping and modelling potential impact from a proposed 4x4 route. And here we're focusing on the remoteness and visual impacts that would have. We have a project in the future, just around the corner, looking with another NGO working to map wilderness areas for potential designation in the Hofsjökull area around the pink-footed goose breeding grounds, and hopefully define some wilderness boundaries based around that. So finally, in terms of conclusions, I'd just say that because of that 43% of the Europe's top 1% figure, then there is some responsibility to protect and map remaining wilderness areas across Iceland. The wilderness in detail is perhaps best mapped using contiguous and fuzzy definitions, but also just to remind you that Bill of Law, February 2001, makes a provision for mapping to become mandatory, but also I think it represents an opportunity for you to supplement rather than replace, but to supplement that definition, the assumptions and mapping criteria in your Nature Conservation Act with reference to IUCN Category 1B and EU Wilderness Guidelines. And I'll leave it there. Thanks.